this Parliament has declined 3 times to pass a withdrawal act with which the opposition, in relation to the withdrawal act, had absolutely no objection. It was then we now have a wide number of this House setting its face against leaving at all. And when this government draws the only logical inference from that position, which is that it must leave, therefore, without any deal at all, it still sets its face, denying the electorate the chance of having its say in how this matter should be resolved. This Parliament is a dead Parliament. It should no longer sit. It has no moral right to sit on these green benches, and whatever they don't like to hear it, Mr. Speaker. They don't like the truth. Twice they have been asked to let the electorate decide upon whether they should continue to sit in their seats while they block 17.4 million people's votes. This Parliament is a disgrace. Given the opportunity, since I am asked, let me tell them the truth. They could vote no confidence at any time, but they're too cowardly. They could agree to a motion to allow this House to dissolve, but they're too cowardly to give it a vote. This Parliament should have the courage to face the electorate. But it won't. It won't, because so many of them are really all about preventing us leaving the European Union at all. But the time is coming. The time is coming, Mr. Speaker, when even these turkeys won't be able to prevent Christmas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Attorney General will find that the moral right I have to sit in this House is due to an election called by the Honourable Lady for Maidenhead, which she lost 40 seats in. And I will represent my constituents as long as I sit in this House, and I'm here elected by the people to do so. Could he tell this House how much taxpayers' money has he spent in closing down our voice?
All I'm suggesting to the honourable gentleman is that he gives his constituents the chance of electing him again. Order! If the honourable gentleman is so confident that his electorate will consider that his moral right to sit here is so strong, why doesn't he submit it to them now? All we need, I offer this to the front bench of the Labour Party, all we need is a one-line bill that we could put through with the Speaker's help, fixing the date of the general election by a simple majority, and we could have the election. Why doesn't he tell his front bench to put his confidence in his constituents to the test? In our Constitution, when a government can no longer govern because the Parliament has withdrawn its assent, the moral and constitutional thing to do is have the courage of your convictions, which this spineless gang on the front bench here do not, to place a motion of no confidence before the House. But they haven't got the guts to put that motion of no confidence because most of them don't want their own leader in power.
Order. I don't normally offer stylistic advice to the Attorney General, but his tendency to perambulate while orating is disagreeable to the House.
I wonder if you, Mr. Speaker, in a well-earned retirement, would like to give lessons to front benchers. It could be our beginnings of a new and very glorious, or even more glorious, career.
Mr. Barry Shearman.
Mr. Speaker, I came into the chamber today thinking I felt sorry for the Attorney General. But as he started, I did. Fair enough. But every word he has uttered, no shame today, no shame at all. The fact that this government cynically manipulated the prorogation to shut down this House so that it couldn't work as a democratic assembly. He knows that that is the truth. And to come here with his barrister's bluster to obfuscate the truth, and for a man like him, a party like this, and a leader like this Prime Minister, to talk about morals and morality is a disgrace!
I'm not sure I could discern in that marshmallow of the rhetoric any actual question. But insofar there was a question, there's an answer. If the honourable gentleman thinks that the government should no longer be governing, tell his leader to bring a motion of no confidence this afternoon. Tell his leader to agree to a simple one-line statute that fixes the election by a simple majority, and we would be delighted to meet him wherever he chooses in front of the electorate.
Why does he not offer the public the chance to vote on the final government Brexit deal, however that turns out?
Because I'll tell him why. Because I think it would be an insult to the millions who voted in the first to have a second one before we'd implemented the first. But the second thing, I think, is this. The question now of this House is whether the government is going to be permitted to govern. If the opposition does not wish to allow it to govern, then its morally correct thing to do is to seek to have an election. What I object to here is that this party and this side of the House has repeatedly sought to block that and to prevent the electorate from having its say when this Parliament is as dead can be.
Mr. Nigel Evans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And following on from that, would the Attorney General accept that the vast majority of people I talk to have great faith in this government, but they have no faith in this Remain Parliament? And whilst there are important legal implications for yesterday's ruling, the practical implications of that ruling is that this Remain Parliament that has talked about Brexit for over 3.5 years will now get several more weeks to do what they possibly can to talk about Brexit, but make absolutely certain that 17.4 million people never get what they voted for.
I wholly understand the strength of feeling of my honourable friend, and I agree with almost all of it.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the Attorney General's theatrical rant earlier, he inadvertently forgot to answer the question from my right honourable friend, the member for Delon. How much has this prorogation cost the taxpayer, and all the legal advice and all the legal consequences cost the UK taxpayer?
I don't know is the answer to that question, but I'm sure if the honourable gentleman wants to know, he can put down a written question, or I'm happy to write to him if you like. I'm very happy to disclose that in due course once the costs are known. But I may say to the honourable gentleman, all those costs could have been saved if he just voted for an election. We could have avoided these cascades of cash falling upon so many lawyers in so many jurisdictions by the simple act of him having the moral guts and not being chicken, which is what they are.
Amber Rudd.
Mr. Speaker, I must raise my concerns about the Attorney General constantly saying that this Parliament is dead. This Parliament was elected in 2017. It reflects the divisions in this country, the divisions in our communities and the divisions in our families. The failure is that we have not yet reached a compromise. Many of us long to leave the European Union, as we set out in the referendum, but are frustrated by the fact that we have not been able to find a consensus amongst the different factions. Can I urge the Attorney General to work with colleagues to try and find that compromise and to cease this language of pitting Parliament against the people?
I assure my right honourable friend that if I hadn't been driven to this language, I would never have used it. The fact is... Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. The fact of the matter is that the opposition won't let the government govern. The opposition won't do what the opposition should do in these circumstances, which is vote for an election. By any standards, the government is in a minority. It's having the order paper taken over from it again and again, and no doubt further attempts to come. And that is the very definition of a parliament that won't fulfil its responsibilities, either to let the Queen's government to be able to be conducted or to opt for a general election. That is why I call this a dead parliament, and I do so advisedly. But I've now reached a sad and heavy conclusion that this parliament's no longer worth sitting or worth the candle, and it should be gone for any good it's doing.
Dr. Philip Lee.
Right honourable and learned gentlemen, the approach today probably should have had more humility and less levity, because there is widespread sympathy for the difficulty of his position offering legal advice in such challenging circumstances. In view of the fact that his advice on prorogation has been found to be unlawful, and building on questions previously, can he answer to the House whether he has been asked by the Prime Minister to proffer advice on the legality and whether it would be lawful to ignore the instruction of the Benn Act? Whether he is offered advice or not is not subject to privilege.
Words fail me, Mr. Speaker. They really do. The right honourable gentleman arises in the full force of his morality, having been elected for one party and sitting there for another. His honourable friend who did the chicken run, the rat run before him, having said already that she thinks there should be a by-election when people change their parties, he has the nerve to arise and suggest somehow that I should have affected greater humility. I think he should be on his knees to his own constituents, on his knees to his own constituents, begging their forgiveness for his betrayal. The fact of the matter is, the question is subject to the Law Officers' Convention, as he knows, and I cannot answer him. But I would suggest that when he's back here re-elected by his constituents, as no doubt he has a confidence that he will be, ask me then, and maybe I'll give him an answer outside.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Attorney General agree with the views of the overwhelming majority of my constituents in Gillingham and Rainham that the continued delay in delivering on the result of the referendum by the 31st of October is leading to the public having a lack of confidence in our democratic process, and the only way to resolve that is to have that election now and let the public decide?
I completely agree with the honourable gentleman. He's put his finger right on it. It is this continuing artificial prolongation of this dead parliament is undermining people's confidence. I know why they're not doing it, because they know they won't survive. But they've got to have the courage of their convictions and get on with it and put it to the country. With respect, all this talk about a coup is just nonsense. Inflamed political tripe, invented and inflated so that this gang can justify clinging to their green benches for another few undeserved weeks. That's what it's all about.